So for more reaction and insight, we now welcome Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Maurice Hirsch, Director at the Initiative for Palestinian Authority Accountability and Reform in the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Thank you so much, as always, for joining us on I-24 News. So there's much to unpack. Let's start with more and more evidence and more voices about the humanitarian aid coming through the Rafah crossing, and Gazans saying that it's being controlled by Hamas. But is this just a drop in the ocean? Give us your assessment of the number of Gazans, the proportionate number who are actually seeing what is unfolding, these hijackings, the aid being used for terror purposes.
So really what we're seeing, Benita, is a clear understanding that was prevalent also beforehand, but is now being more and more stressed and is becoming more and more apparent to everyone. UNRWA is not an organization that promotes peace. It's not an organization that's promoting the settlement of the Palestine refugees. It's not an organization that is promoting anything that can be comparable to clarifying the situation, de-escalating the situation. UNRWA in its entirety, I must say, not only in the Gaza Strip, we'll touch on the Gaza Strip immediately, is an organization which perpetuates the lie that these Palestine refugees will one day demographically and democratically destroy Israel. Within Gaza itself, we have to understand the situation there. We're not talking about a Western democracy. We're talking about an enclave that is entirely controlled and dominated by a homicidal, genocidal terrorist organization that controls everything. Nothing moves in Gaza without the permission of Hamas. And therefore, when you understand that UNRWA operates only by the grace of Hamas, you understand that it's very easy for Hamas then to ensure that its operatives, its terrorists, take up central positions in UNRWA. If you remember the tweet from the beginning of the war that Hamas terrorists had entered one of the UNRWA enclaves and had stolen 24,000 liters of fuel, a tweet that was very quickly deleted by UNRWA, or I would assume because it was attacking Hamas. And so really that whole prospect of UNRWA as an organization which is neutral, which is now really providing the world with the narrative of what's going on. If you follow UNRWA, they're describing this desperate situation in Gaza. Everything is Israel's fault. It is never once mentioned that it is Hamas that is dominating UNRWA, that is stealing the aid that the international community is sending into the Gaza Strip, that is Hamas that is really starving the civilian population, and not Israel. Israel is sending more and more trucks and food and fuel and everything into Gaza,
right,
all taken by Hamas to support its war effort.
And we just heard that phone call. We hear the officer asking the Gazan resident, didn't you try to talk to the people of UNRWA about Hamas taking over the aid? And he replies, his exact words, sir, UNRWA officials are Hamas. So when you hear that, it speaks to what you're describing, but what kind of reaction would you expect from abroad to that exact conversation?
Well, so really the international community is trying as best as possible, as is unfortunately often the case, to ignore the clear evidence that is being presented to the fact that UNRWA is not a neutral organization. It is dominated by Hamas. Their general will is to castigate and vilify Israel and never to once see in an objective manner that really the source of the problem here isn't Israel. It isn't the Israeli activities fighting against terror and against the massacre of October 7th, but really the Hamas terrorists in Gaza. That realization has to fall when we saw the reports of an UNRWA teacher being party to holding Israelis hostages in captivity. That should have set off every type of alarm bell possible. It didn't. Then we saw other UNRWA staff involved in these activities, and all the organization had to say, well, you can't erase these unfounded reports. These aren't unfounded reports. This is the reality that the world must now sit up and face. And until really the world accepts that UNRWA is a bad organization and is not a helpful organization, and that really it is Hamas just in another form, unfortunately, I don't think we'll see any change in the situation.
It's still quite staggering to think that one of the people holding Israeli hostages inside Gaza during this time was, in fact, an UNRWA teacher. And as you're saying, the reaction abroad was muted. Let's talk a little bit more about what happens next. We know Benjamin Netanyahu has 3 prerequisites for peace. He says Hamas must be destroyed, Gaza must be demilitarized, and Palestinian society must be de-radicalized. Given what you're talking about, the education that is happening, the teaching that is happening through UNRWA and elsewhere, how is that a viable goal? Realistically, how can Palestinian society be de-radicalized according to that outline plan from the Prime Minister?
So really, Benita, when you understand that the old Chinese prophet, that if you want to really influence the future for generations, you focus on education. And that is really what the Palestinian Authority has done for the last 30 years under Oslo. It used and abused all of the powers and jurisdiction it was given to take that education, to make it more and more radicalized, more and more fanatical, to really imbue it with unbelievable hate of both Israel and Israelis. That's what created this situation where the terrorists who committed the massacre on the 7th of October weren't 16-year-olds. They weren't people who only grew up under Hamas rule in Gaza. These were people who were educated in the PA schools under the PA curriculum that it's also used by UNRWA. And really that is the source of the fundamental evil, the Palestinian Authority school curriculum. Now, what Prime Minister Netanyahu is talking about and discussing is that in Gaza, at least starting in Gaza, Palestinian society there has to undergo really a form of denazification. There really is no other word for it. It's not de-radicalization, it's denazification. These people have been taught to not value, to dehumanize Jews to the point where they can murder babies, they can decapitate people, and it doesn't really bother them. That's a form of dehumanization that we haven't seen for a long time, and that is what needs to change. We need to replace the Gazan education system with another system. What system should that be? Should it be an Israeli system? I fear not exactly, but there are examples of Arab countries with more progressive educational systems. For example, the United Arab Emirates that has quite a refined education system and curriculum that even teaches about the Holocaust and teaches about a really coexistence and tolerance. Something like that could be implemented also in Gaza.
Certainly a long road ahead. Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Maurice Hirsch, thank you as always for your insights. Appreciate you joining us on I-24 News.
Thank you very much.